What could happen if we lived and led like the kingdom mattered, more than our turf?
And now, this.
Kingdom Over Turf podcast.
I appreciate you doing this for you guys. How long have you been here again?
I've been here since January 1st, 2020. That was when I transitioned from Jacksonville Baptist Association, now First Coast Churches, into this role. I thought January 2020 would be a really good time to get into the financial world. And then 2020 happened. And it was just such
Here comes March.
Yeah, it was just such a strange, I'd been here about 8 weeks and everybody went home. So it was quite the introduction. It was a blessing in disguise because as a new leader coming in, I moved from Jacksonville Baptist here. At the same time, Bob Bumgarner, who I had worked for before at the Florida Baptist Convention, left his church. He was then with Chet's Creek Church and came into the role at Jacksonville Baptist. We both started January 1st, 2020.
Wow.
Both of us just went through the very disorienting experience of trying to lead something in a new, fresh way, and then everything shuts down.
Gives you a little bit of a blank slate.
Well, that's the blessing. It not only gave us a blank slate strategy-wise, but it gave us time. Mm-hmm. This is a very travel-intense role, and so being off the road gave me time to think about vision, strategy, communication, branding, all of the things that a new leader would come in and think about the first 100 days.
Right.
I had some free time on my calendar to think about those things. Looking back on it, it was good and a blessing, but we didn't have our feet under us for a while.
You didn't have to figure out how do we develop these relationships or keep relationships or strengthen relationships, and move things in a new direction.
Yeah. What we ended up doing was spending a lot of time. Mark McDonald would be a good guest to have at some point if you haven't, but he helped us think through our persona of who we were trying to communicate with, what our message was, and what the felt needs were. So it really gave us a time to pause. We did focus groups around the state with pastors and really hear what their needs were, particularly with respect to the financial side of ministry.
Yeah.
And so that was incredibly valuable. I don't know that we would have gotten to that for maybe a year or two.
Wow.
If I had come in and had to meet everybody across the state.
No, and I'm feeling that right now. We have been in that space as well. So I stepped in to this role almost 3 years ago. It's really hit the ground running, momentum, build relationships, build traction, just establish trust, and kind of navigating, okay, what is this going to look like for here? Because every association is different. Now I'm at a point where I'm going, okay, we've established some trust. I need some help.
Yeah.
I need help from a branding. It's a negative terminology, but that's not what it is. It's really more about how do we articulate who God is calling us to be and how we're stepping into that to help serve churches.
And put clear, powerful language around that will help people interpret what you do and what value you bring.
Do you think it was worth, because I know a lot of people we live in the church world, so sometimes they go branding language as business language, or has it paid for itself, that investment?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there's a theology we could talk about in terms of how powerful communication is throughout the scripture. When God was creating, he spoke, and the use of language and messaging in the Bible is important. So I think we ought to pay attention to it. Was it worth it? Absolutely. My role here and my journey here for 5.5, 6 years now is there wasn't a 5-10 year plan. There was just a direction that I felt we needed to go. The board and I had agreement on that when they invited me to come here. I was pretty happy serving in the role you have here in Jacksonville and could have landed the plane there. Once you are in that role for about 7, 8, 9 years, you've earned the credibility, the relationships are formed, the trust is there, and you can get things done a lot quicker.
Oh, yeah.
When your capital is an AMS, your capital is relationships and trust, and you're brokering relationships and resources with a network of leaders. So once that's established, you really guard it, and I really didn't want to step away from that. But this opportunity presented itself, and I saw the potential here, the potential to take an organization that had a lot of potential, a lot of capacity, and actually was doing a really good job. Just more people needed to know about it and understand how to find the handles and how helpful it could be. So in that sense, a lot of what we've done here, there have been structural changes, personnel changes, and software changes, but fundamentally it was a direction of going towards helping that pastor that's out there plowing their corner of the kingdom understand what it is we do and how we can come alongside and help them accomplish their Great Commission responsibilities. Languaging it and talking about it in short bits and in long form became really important for us.
I am finding more and more in these types of roles where we don't have any influence in the local church. Sorry. We don't have any leadership, like I can come in and say, hey, you got to do this. We have none of those things. Communication is like 90% of what it is that I spend my time doing. It is a lot of communication.
It is. The old adage of by the time you're about getting nauseous of saying it, you're probably almost there in terms of the content getting where it needs to go and being received. The benefit you have versus where we're at, as you're one step closer to the local church, because you can be with them a lot more than we with a handful of people trying to cover 2,800 churches across the state. I will also add, you kind of touched on this, your leadership capital or your base of influence will rise upon your ability to help people understand what you can do to help them. The good news is you have a little bit more access to them because of the proximity, which I think is invaluable. But you also have to convince them. When I came into the role, I spent the first year or two trying to make the argument of why the local association still mattered. At that time, we were in the early stages of GCRs, tribal language, Great Commission resurgent, which meant there was a lot of contraction and downsizing, and people were really questioning, will there be a local association even around in 5 or 10 years? Well, here we are 15 years later, and it's still doing fine, but it's different.
It is.
It's very different. It takes a different kind of leadership skills. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the conversation that SBCAL was having about redefining the role, retitling the role, what the proficiencies would be.
You're a chair of that committee.
I was, a long time ago in a galaxy far away.
That's why we have the term MS now.
It is, but it's not important if people accept the terminology or not. We needed something that conveyed a fundamental tectonic shift had happened. The role had shifted so much that the title just wasn't relevant anymore. So if you like the old title, run with it if it works for you. But we felt like we needed some new, again, we're back to language, but we needed some new words that described, and missional strategists seemed to be the most appropriate.
Well, and I like it because I'm not a director of anything. I don't tell the churches do anything.
Good luck trying.
Yeah, that would be bad. One of the things that I like about, you talk about proximity, it's not just communication between me and the churches. I also have conversations like this because I need to know what kingdom resources are available out there, relationships that need to be connected to, and also why it should matter. Like, what's the value that exists? You're telling me to go to these people. What's the purpose in going to them? We can do this on our own, but it's part of a bigger narrative taking place. That's part of the reason why Baptist Financial Services exists, because you are contributing to a kingdom narrative. Is that an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. And there's a anecdotal story that I usually tell to illustrate that. You and I both know a guy named Craig Colbreth, who's retired now, a great friend and longtime ministry leader here. He was the person within the Florida Baptist Convention that for a long time related to the associational leaders.
Right.
And when Craig was talking to us as state staff, he would say, now guys, be reminded that no pastor wakes up and thinks about what's going on at the state convention or the local association. When I was in the associational role, I would say, yeah, Craig, but here's what I'm banking on. I don't want them waking up thinking about what's going on within a convention or denomination or even the local association. They need to be thinking about their mission field, their corner of the kingdom, their people, their parish. However, I'm thinking that probably by noon, they've encountered a challenge, a struggle, an opportunity, a moment, and they think, I wonder who else around in my network of friends and churches has encountered this or would have some resources to help me overcome this or step into this opportunity. And I want to be seen as the doorway to those relationships and resources. And so it's a matter of being a curator of those things. So people go, when they have a question or they're stuck on something, I'm going to call Chris because I'm in my same context every day. He's in 50 different contexts every month. And so he's going to have opportunities and knowledge that's going to be really helpful to me. And by the way, that's not just a small church thing. That can be a church of any size.
Yeah.
The opportunity of we is greater than me, the collective IQ of the mission field is really powerful and I think best delivered at the local level.
Yeah. Let me ask this. So you transitioned from AMS role here at JBA, which is now First Coast Churches, to stepping into this role. It seems like a completely different area. I cannot imagine leaving my current MS role and stepping into a role like yours.
Yeah.
Was that always part of your story
Yes,
and
it
interest
has.
background?
Yeah, this is kind of coming home for me vocationally. I loved what I did. The Jacksonville network of churches is special, and I think you have something special where you're at too. There are just leaders here in Jacksonville that I don't know that I would have come here to do the local network thing if those churches and leaders, I mean, obviously the Lord brought it all together. And other people saw me in that role before I saw me in that role, which was very powerful. That's a whole other story. As far as leaving there to come here, the real quick background on me is grew up as a pastor's kid in a local church here 30 miles from where we're sitting between Green Cove and Palatka. My dad was a pastor there for about 25 years. Wasn't running away from ministry, but just did not see myself, and nobody else who knew me would see me. Pastoral type role. Went to University of North Florida, got a finance degree. Went into banking. The best thing I got out of the banking era of my life was my wife. We met in banking and we got married in '93. For those who've been in Florida a long time will remember Barnett Bank.
Yeah.
They had about 400 offices all over Florida. We were the big retail bank in Florida. Barnett had a lapse of judgment and hired me out of UNF and put me in a 2-year training program where I learned all about banking, retail, commercial real estate, the whole thing. It was a wonderful experience. It was like getting a master's degree in banking and finance, being paid for by a commercial bank. Stayed in banking for about 9 years, and in 1997, the Lord called us to leave banking and go to seminary.
Oh.
Was not on the radar, was not, I mean, I was...
The bait and switch on your wife.
Although she was right there with me in the calling, the Lord said it to her while he was saying it to me. It was a pretty hard right turn for us. Left Merritt Island, Florida, where I was at that time working for SunTrust, and went to Louisville, Kentucky to Southern Baptist Seminary. My brain about exploded because I was taught how to assimilate large amounts of information and boil it down to a decision. Or we have a new product or service and I got a 25-page product manual and I've got to train my staff in 20 minutes. So I've got to take lots of information and boil it down to the critical elements. When I got to Southern Seminary, I had a theology professor, his name was Al Mohler, and he wanted me to take a doctrine of verbal plenary inspiration and write a 20-page paper on it. My brain was having to do the exact opposite of what I was trained to do. So that development of critical thinking skills was a whole new element. Came back, served in church world, and then the way I say it, the Florida Baptist Convention interrupted my life. They see it differently. It was a wonderful experience, met some wonderful people. And from about 2002, 2003, till today, I've kind of been in the church resourcing world. My roots are in finance and banking and in the client services area.
Yeah.
So when this role became available, because my predecessor retired, I began to talk to some people about it. My wife said to me, "Rick, this is you. It looks like God has lined up all of the different seasons of your life to prepare you for this role." And that has turned out to be absolutely true. I'm 6 years into this role, and there isn't a week that goes by that I don't draw on something from my church staff experience, my theological education, my financial training. All of that has come together in this role. And it wasn't something I was looking for, but it has been a really good fit for the journey that God has had me on.
What's something that you pull from over and over again that translates into the financial realm? Like, all of us have this core thing that we can trace or source back to. Something happened in our life, or an epiphany occurred, a realization as you're reading scripture, or an experience you had. You see your passions now, and you can tie it back to that singular moment where it was like, yeah, this is it.
When you describe that, I'm reminded of experiencing God when Henry Blackaby would have you chart your spiritual journey and some of those high points. So I don't know that there's been one epiphany, but there has been a number of critical moments that were incredibly life-shaping experiences. And what I would say they kind of theme around is development of relationships and trust. Whether you're in a local church, John Maxwell talks about you don't do anything big without getting in Earl's truck and go riding around his farm. The investment into people that leaders need to make that leadership is something you do with people, not to people, has borne out to be true whether I was in financial services in the secular world, at the local church, in convention life, or now in this role. There's financial wisdom and content, the things built with my experience over time. But what I'm really wired to do is help relate to people, hear their needs, understand what they're facing, and then serve them to move forward what God's got for them.
That's good.
So it's more of a leadership journey that I've been on. I think in being in this role, or even a pastoral role, I've never been running from the Lord. It's felt like God said, okay, now you're ready for this next step. Like, I'm not going to turn this over to you until you prove to me you're not going to wreck it because of your ego. I spent most of my 30s getting over myself. My journey into this role has been one of I must decrease and he must increase. The more that I have focused on that, everything else kind of fit into place.
So you mentioned getting into it. What was that thing in your 30s that you needed to have shift in you before you were ready for that next?
I grew up in a small town, rural, and I felt like I had something to prove. I don't know to whom, but I did. I have gone back and apologized to people that knew me. I wasn't awful, but I would bruise people. I was short-tempered. I was extremely driven. God laughs at all of that then and now. My goal in my banking career, which is laughable to me now, was I wanted to be a vice president before I was 30. When I turned 30, I became a vice president. Now I should have shot a lot higher than that. Nothing against vice presidents in banks. That is kind of a silly life goal when I look back on it now. It meant something to me then, but if you got in the way of my career back then, I was not a pleasant person. I was a believer. Jesus was in my life, but again, he had a lot of work to do on me back in those days before he would say, okay, now I'm ready for you to go prepare to serve the church vocationally. I was in the church, a deacon, serving in the choir and on the finance team, but to go and actually get behind the counter and start being a leader in a church, my character wasn't ready for that yet. And so a lot of it was just getting over myself. The first time my wife met me, she thought I was stuck up. We laugh about that now, but she saw me driving some 10-year-old BMW that I thought was hot stuff. She said, who's that stuck-up guy? Fortunately, she got past that and we developed a relationship. That was just a good indication. I don't know that I would have liked me back in my younger days. And so I'm 58 now, so I'm not working on yourself is something you're never done with. I'm glad I'm not where I was back then. A lot of that journey was the moving beyond myself to go, there's got to be something much bigger and greater to pour your life out for than just building yourself up or your career. The Lord had some work to do. My starting point was coming from very little and watching my dad pastor in ministry and serve the church well, but also was not financially smart in some of the things he did in the little local church that he was with. Probably missed a lot of opportunities to take care of he and my mom. A lot of what drives me now as I look at their story and my story of how I grew up, I'm trying to help pastors not end up there.
That's good.
My heart and my vision is always for that. My dad wasn't bivocational, he was trivocational. He just had a number of jobs at any given time. So a few times during my childhood, he was just full-time. But most of my childhood, he was working in construction and sales. He got his general contractor's license and built homes and did renovations. My heart goes to that pastor who's out there trying to shepherd their flocks, preach the word well, make disciples. My dad never pastored a big church, pastored the same church for over 2 decades and won to the Lord, discipled, and there were at least 4 men preaching in pulpits that he saw come to salvation. Praise and God. Then discipled them into becoming pastors. Yeah. And so there was a very meaningful, very faithful ministry. Yeah. But there was also some things along the way that I take into this role now and say, hey, let's do better than that.
And I wonder if that small town thing is, so I came from small town as well, Callahan. Yeah. And grew up, born and raised there, but dealt with some of those same things. It takes a humbling, and God will humble you in how much you don't know.
Absolutely.
And it has an impact. If you were talking to your dad, You were talking to him as the role you are now and not as your dad, but as a pastor. You're communicating to him. What are some of the common themes that you see going on in the local church that you wish, let me give you some counsel, let me give you some advice, I just want to help?
From the pastoral role itself, there's general advice for churches that we encounter every day, but in terms of what I would say to that pastor, be very careful to provide for yourself and your spouse for retirement, because there's going to come a day when you're not going to be at this church anymore. Some are doing a great job of this. Many times the church has not, they're doing the best they can just to put a salary together, but they haven't really done much for the future.
Yeah.
The story of my dad was he got to the retirement age of his life and he hadn't put a whole lot aside. The church had not put much aside. If it were not, my mom worked for the Clay County Sheriff's Office for 28 years. Had it not been for her state pension, they would have been solely relying upon Social Security or benevolence. When I sat in the role that you have, I consistently had retirement age pastors come into my office, many of whom had opted out of Social Security decades before. We advise against it. If you're going to do it, you better be really good at saving and investing.
Don't have a short-term
Do
perspective
not.
there.
If you are not, now I've known some people who've opted out, put money aside, and done quite well.
Absolutely.
But they were super disciplined about it. And their churches participated in that as well. So it can be done. It usually is not done well, has been my experience. Be very careful to not just put food on the table, but be sure that your church, your treasurer, your finance team, whoever that is in the church, and you are talking about, hey, I want to plant my life here. I want to grow deep roots. I want to love you as a people, but I've got to think about where my family is going to be 20, 30, 40 years from now. We need to plan for that. That's biblical. Be careful to plan for that. The second thing I would say, just from a pastoral leadership standpoint, is don't shy away from talking about money. Several reasons that pastors can avoid this. Some don't, but a lot do. There's over 2,300 verses in the Bible that deal with God's provision or finances or somehow help us know about money. And I love to say to people, wouldn't it be great if Jesus were your financial advisor? And they'll go, yeah. And I go, well, good news, he is. He's giving you 2,000 plus verses in the Bible. There's so much biblical content about what it means to follow God with our money. Don't leave that out of your discipleship profile. If you're all about making disciples, and I hope you are, what it means to be a disciple of Jesus means that we have to be good stewards and we have to be givers. We have to be generous. You're never more like Jesus than when you're a giver. I don't know that that message is pervasive in our discipleship conversations as much as it should be. Some reasons it's not is sometimes pastors don't feel highly competent when it comes to finances. It's not been part of their training or background, or maybe they've even got financial dilemmas going on in their life and they don't feel like they have a standing to talk authoritatively about it. But I would just say, go to the Word. Let the Word lead you to the truth that you need to share with people, because there's a whole bunch in there.
Before we jump back in, I want to take just a moment to introduce one of our family of churches community partners. You're about to hear from Wesley Lewis, founder of 180 Digital. Wesley brings a rare blend of pastoral ministry experience and digital expertise, and his heart is helping churches do more with what God has already entrusted to them. Listen into this short clip, and if you'd like to connect with Wesley, just look up 180 Digital.
46% of Southern Baptist churches in the state of Florida do not have a web presence, a website that actually represents them online.
2026, you said there's 46% of churches?
46% do not have a web presence. As we started diving into it, we thought it might be up to 25, 30%, but those numbers just crept higher than we thought. And we thought, surely they're going to come down. Like, we're going to hit these suburban and urban areas and those numbers are going to come back down, but they never did. And we finally got done. We just walked away and we were just like, wow. And it's one of those confirmations with me of understanding this is why God put this on my heart, so that I could find out that this is true. And we're really committed to making a dent in that number. A lot of churches obviously already have a great web presence and they're doing fantastic. We want to work with normative sized churches, rural churches, urban churches, international churches, help them understand what they need to have online, why it's important, and how they can have the tools to be able to do that.
whether you want to talk about the parable of the talents, in Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower. 11 of Jesus' parables dealt with money somehow. In the parable, the gospel work, Jesus explains that parable to the disciples. He says it was the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of wealth that choked out the gospel work in people's lives. Perhaps if you're not seeing the gospel prevail in the lives of marriages and families and in your church community, maybe that they're being deceived by wealth. Jesus could have said anything, but he chose to say, this is a thing you got to watch out for. So if we don't address that biblically and go, how do we make sure our hearts don't get attached to the things of this world and to the rat race of trying to have more, we're never going to step into who God's called us to be.
Do you think that part of the first conversation that you would be having, it's sort of like a cyclical effect? Because they're not talking about the second part, they don't feel like they can talk about the first part.
Sure.
Whenever it comes to retirement and provision.
Yeah, but the retirement conversation isn't just for you. People in your church need to be thinking about themselves. Lots in the Proverbs about saving and storing up and being careful, not in a excessive way.
Yeah.
What did Joseph do? Well, he stored up during the good years, so when the bad years came. There's a strong biblical teaching and principle of saving well, spending wisely, and giving generously.
Right.
I mean, that's the sermon. If you're looking for the 3-point sermon, that's it. And you see it over and over in Scripture. Money success really kind of comes down to those three things. So, yeah, don't shy away from it and see it not as the other thing I didn't mention earlier of why pastors shy away from it is they don't want to be seen as money raisers.
Yeah.
Don't. Just move away from that idea and move to the discipleship conversation. Trust me, if people are following Jesus with their money, your church is going to be well-funded. The Great Commission causes you're concerned with are going to be taken care of. It's really a matter of the heart. Now, you got to make it easy and make it practically just real super easy for people to find ways to give. And there's some practical, technical things you can do for that, and we can help with that. But start with the heart. Start with what the Bible says about what it means to follow God with our money. You'll find that if you're looking at the Bible with that lens, you'll see a lot of biblical data that comes into play.
It's interesting as I talk with pastors, and I've met with a lot of them. One of the issues that I see happening over and over again, especially some of those that are a little bit older, they've worked a full-time career in another field, or part of the military. They have money coming in from other sources, and they step into church roles in a bivocational fashion, but then they do the work full-time. And then 5, 10, 15 years goes by, and not only do they not take an increase, oftentimes they will take a decrease.
Because they can.
Right, because they can. And when I try to communicate, there was a church leader a couple of weeks ago asking about insurance. Insurance is a big deal right now. And they were like, we don't know what to do. We hate to go to our church and just ask. And my encouragement was, you need to think not just about for you. You're thinking about your family. You're thinking about the long term, but you're also thinking about the next person.
That's right.
Somebody is going to sit in that seat when you're gone. And if the church has not intentionally, strategically, on a yearly basis, looked at provision, looked at cost of living, looked at all of those factors, the buying power of the dollar versus what it was when you started. If they haven't done that and you retire, the next person that comes in is going to say, I need X amount, and the church is not going to be anywhere near
That's right.
being able to afford that because they've not been prepared for it. Is that something that you're seeing?
It is. Seeing exactly, you described it well in the dynamics behind it. The best thing you can do is have a compensation policy that your church, I mean, you have all kind of other kind of financial policies, this is how we're going to approach finances. And that should include, any CPA would tell you as a nonprofit, you should do this. You should have some sort of compensation policy that says, what is our policy and practice as a church with how we decide compensation for the people who work here, particularly the ones in leadership roles.
Yeah.
And there ought to be periodic 1 to 3 years looking at outside data on that role of responsibility in the marketplace in a comparison study. So, Lifeway, Guidestone, others are, there's others out there, Vanderbloemen and others do.
There's a lot more out there than used to be. It used to always be comparing to teachers.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot more data about pastors.
That's right. But you can get data now fairly easily that will give you this kind of a church, this kind of a role, this kind of activity, these kind of responsibilities. Ideally, you would have a church leadership who are approaching the compensation of their pastor through a policy. The wonderful thing about having some things written down that will go past my time here is if you've hung around Baptist churches for long, the people come and the people go. Now, some people stay a long time, but sometimes leaders come and leaders go. And so having a policy that says, this is our approach as a church, this is the commitment we're going to have to how we compensate our pastor, that will live past the lay leaders in the church. It'll live past the current pastor. And it ought to have some things in there about how you're going to develop your salary ranges, performance reviews. I can't tell you how many churches never sit down and have a performance conversation with their pastor. So many things could get handled when they're small and not become big if they can be dealt with that way. But have regular conversations about performance, expectations, and yes, salary, and deal with that on a regular basis so that you don't get behind your point where the market, what it takes to bring the next pastor is so far above our budgeted amount, we can't afford that person anymore. And now we're in a corner.
Yeah, that's part of the issue. And that has a trickle-down effect. What ends up happening is they settle for somebody that may do pulpit supply preaching, and he gets stuck in that position. I've actually seen churches where we've lost facilities because they're just bringing in this random person that doesn't have the same heritage, history, beliefs, and background. They're just filling the pulpit. But after they filled the pulpit for a period of time, they've established trust, they've established relationship. Then they move them away from who they've been centrally as a church, specifically a Baptist church. And then at that point in time, they completely disconnect from what's going on. It does have that trickle-down effect, long-term impact, and that's damaging.
It is. And so, you want to have something written down that is, I worked for Dr. John Sullivan for many years. He was a statesman here in the state of Florida in Baptist life. He used to have a saying that when Baptists disagree, the documents win.
Yeah.
And what he was implying with that is make sure you've got good documents. Make sure your documents can give good guidance, good governance to the church in all matters, but certainly pastoral leadership. I don't have to make the argument of how critical having the right pastor is to the health and vitality of a local church. It's not everything, but it's a lot, and it touches everything. So making sure you have crafted that position biblically, responsibly, and thought about not just today, but the future really matters.
So we talked a little bit about pastors. We talked about retirement and them needing to prepare well. What about churches themselves? In the same way, eventually those people the guard will change, people will move on, the pastors will move on, but the church remains the same. How do they, from a financial standpoint, really protect for the ongoing? What are the common mistakes that you see churches are making?
I'll give you two that come right to my mind. One would be not having any kind of allowance or set aside for facility maintenance and the ongoing rise of costs associated with just keeping your buildings up. The longer your church is around and the older your facilities are, the more it's going to cost to keep them up. You see it a lot where we go to try to help a church, and one of the biggest issues they're facing are facilities that the maintenance on those facilities has been deferred so long. It's kind of like the issue with the pastor. We can't hardly catch up now. So that, I would say, make sure you're including in your ministry spending plan, that's what I call a budget, an allowance that says these buildings are really important to our ministry. We've got to invest in them. So don't neglect that.
Is that 5 years in? Do you start incorporating that, or is that immediately?
Before you build the building. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
how much?
That's a good question. I know churches that'll set aside close to 10% of their budget for that. At least have a building fund and talk about it, because it's not only the maintenance. You might have additions, renovations, or other things you want to do down the road. There's not a set amount, but it's not going to be small. Buildings are expensive.
When you say 10%, you mean 10% annually? It resets every year, or what happens at the end of the year?
Well, I know there's some different ways to approach it, but if you can line item and just say, we're going to invest in this amount this year, as much as you can without it taking away from other ministry priorities. And I would say, even with Rick, we can't afford to do all of that. Do something. It's just kind of like you're giving. If you can't give the way you think you should, at least do something. So try to make it a percentage so that as the church grows, you're able to do more. The other thing is make sure you're considering long-term what those needs are going to be. I would say, in addition to putting some money aside in your budget, make sure you're thinking long-term assets like your land, your building, those kind of things And even some of your mission endeavors. We want to plant 10 churches in 10 years, or we want to send 20 mission teams, or whatever that is. Those kind of God-given long-term missional goals. We need a long-term funding strategy. A lot of times we think we're going to pay that out of our savings account or our checking account. And what we would say, and the reason that we exist first and foremost as a charitable foundation, is helping people make long-term charitable gifts to churches. Not just teaching people to tithe, to be generous and give charitably out of their paychecks and their cash, but probably, if the statistics hold, about 90% of people's wealth is non-cash. It's retirement accounts, real estate, things that are not in a savings or checking account. Giving out of those assets requires a different strategy. That's where we can come in and talk to them about a long-term giving fund that could be an endowment or a quasi-endowment. I know we've talked before about some scholarship endowment and other things that we manage. We would recommend any church that has facilities and a long-term mission focus to have an endowment set up for that so it can perpetually fund those things for the long haul.
I want to dive into this just a little bit. Let's be transparent, do a lot of churches do well at long-term planning, whether it comes to finances or it comes to vision?
Well, let me say it this way. It's the hardest conversation to have because there's no immediate effect. We're cultivating gifts and plans for funds to be cultivated, invested, and distributed maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. But one thing I'll always say to a finance team or a pastor is, don't you wish 20 years ago the pastor in the 1990s or the 2000s would have set this up and encouraged people to leave estate gifts and other types of charitable gifts? You'd be in a very different position now. So what we're really doing is planting trees that we won't sit underneath the shade of. Other people, our children and grandchildren, will sit under the shade of these trees, but you plant the tree. And aren't you glad that somebody else handed you things that you didn't have to build?
But that's part of the benefit from them looking at the financial angle. It's also the realization of, do we have plans for 10 years?
That's right.
One of the most difficult things I have whenever I work with churches is I start quoting scripture to them and I say, Jesus tells us that we are to walk by faith and not by sight. And yet, when I go into a church and I start having conversations about that, it is one of the most difficult things to do.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if this conversation about finances and practical things, caring for your pastor, planning for the future, whenever it comes to buildings, is also a segue into the realization that this is something we should actually start putting some energy into. That way we're not just focusing on, hey, the next Sunday is coming.
I do think, to your point, the funding should match the strategy, not the other way around. We don't just cultivate a lot of money and then figure out what to do with it.
Absolutely.
It should start with a vision, right? And then the vision gets funded. It does beg the question, what has the Lord laid on your heart about the future of this church as it relates to his kingdom? We know about the tyranny of every Sunday that comes every 7 days. You have to prepare a sermon. You have to make sure the kids' ministry is working well. You've got to, all the fundamentals and blocking and tackling of church has to happen. But where do we see God taking us into the future, and what are the steps we need to take to prepare for that? Prepare is a better word than plan, because God's already got the future.
Right.
He's bringing it to us. Let's get ready for it. Start with the vision, long-range planning. What is that long-range view of what you have? Pick your head up, look beyond this week, this month, this year, and think about 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Should the Lord not return, and I'd be okay if he did, but if he doesn't, we should be found faithful. And that also means not just planning for the needs of today, but what we know is coming towards us. And generationally, it's going to be harder to fund the church out of the weekly giving, right?
Yeah.
That's not a guess. I mean, that's just watching lines play out on a graph. So plan for that.
Yeah.
Because we know we're in the largest transference of wealth in the history of the world and the church. The question is, are we having conversations about estate gifts? When people say, I've got this IRA and other investable assets, appreciated stocks, there are tax smart ways to give those. You can still be generous to your kids and grandkids. If you have 2 kids, consider a third one called charity and give to your church. Hasn't this church meant a lot to you and your family? Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to consider it in your estate? We have those conversations and help people make those plans to make those gifts, perhaps 5, 10, 15 years from now. There's more to estate planning than that, but that's kind of at the heart of it.
I've heard that there is a large majority of financial contributions that the church doesn't receive.
That's right.
Why is that? And typically, what are the average on those numbers?
There's probably a lot of factors into that. The numbers are, if you look at longitudinally giving, charitable giving, good news, bad news. Good news is it's just a little bit under 3%. By the way, does it make a difference if in the church or outside the church? Americans give 3% of their income to charity. By our best understandings of what people affiliated with an evangelical church give, is 3% of their income. The question is, what are they giving to? The good news is that number has not gone down much since the 1980s. It's about 2.7 to 2.8%, just under 3%. It goes up a little, goes down, but it just kind of bebops along. It's stayed right there, just a little bit less than 3%. The bad news is who's receiving those funds. Back 40 years ago, in the late 80s and 90s, it was close to about 40%, maybe a little bit more than that, was going to religious causes. Others would go to educational, where they went to college. Because trust me, they're calling your church members and asking for money if they went to. If you graduated from XYZ school.
I get a letter from a school that it was bought out by the school that I went to.
You're going to get those letters. Hospitals, environmental causes, animal causes, all those altruistic things out there. The percentage of the American economy that's going towards charitable giving, the question is how much of that is going towards what we would consider kingdom causes within the church. That has dropped in half in the last 40 years. It was in the 40s, now it's down in the mid-20s. The giving pinch that we're feeling in the church, by the way, millennials and Gen Z give just as generously as previous generations. Some data suggest more, they're just not giving as much to the church.
Why is that?
Because they don't see the value of it. The counter argument is we shouldn't have to show them the value, you should just be obedient. Yes, but have you done that? Have you taught obedience? If you've done that and they're not, then I think that's on them.
Are you making disciples who actually value generosity? Then it goes back even further in the conversation when it talks about, are we communicating
That's
well
right.
and using language that people understand?
Yeah, and there's an extra burden that we now, we can curse the darkness, but it is what it is. A leader in a church today has to do something that a leader in a church didn't have to do, say, in 1985. And that is they have to teach stewardship and generosity because the home is not doing it. I learned to give because I'd walk by my dad's burgundy red Bible and see that pink envelope in it on Saturday night. They say going to Sunday morning church is a Saturday night. Well, giving is also a Saturday night decision.
That's true.
The checks was written out. It was placed in that magical envelope that we all know about as Baptists, and it was placed in the Bible. So when it was giving time in church, we were ready.
And now I'm going to tap this NPC code.
And I'm not busted on the technology, but we had conversations about, as a family, how much we gave, why we gave, the importance of giving. I don't know that those same conversations are happening between parents and children or grandparents and grandchildren. What I would say, number one, pastors and church leaders, let's be sure to equip those parents and grandparents, not just to be faithful, but to teach faithfulness in generosity and stewardship.
They've been giving them a means. You have to build a framework to say this is what it looks
And
like.
I'll come back to a practical way to do that in a moment. In addition to that, you've got to acknowledge that the family's not going to do it for us as a church. We're going to have to step in and disciple these younger generations on why it's important to give, to be obedient, show them the scripture and show them the impact.
Yeah.
Have a conversation in your church where you say, hey, did you know that because you gave, we were able to do this and God did this and people's hearts were moved and lives were saved. God did it, but ministry can take funding. And because you gave, we had the funding to do this. And God moved in the midst of that with our loaves and fishes.
So storytelling.
Storytelling doesn't have to be a 15-minute video or a testimony.
We don't make it a 15-minute
It probably is not going to work. But a 30-second to 45-second, say, did you know that because you gave, we were able to do this and God did this? You can do that in 30 seconds or 45 seconds. So incorporate those. Don't assume that people can connect the dots, that when they express generosity, God takes that and does kingdom things with it. There's a value to that. We try to make our churches look well, have all the adornment, not opulence, but we have nice churches. Some people, the nicest building they'll walk in all week is your church. Their living room's not as nice as your church. I grew up in a small country church, and most of the people who went to that church, the church house was a nice building compared to where they were at most of the week, at work and at home. They walk in there and they look around and go, well, they probably should give me some money. They probably don't need any money. So don't assume that people understand the importance of giving. It's not just to make the church more beautiful. It's about serving the kingdom. And the other thing I like to tell about teaching giving is What if some generous donor in your church wrote a big check? They had maybe a big windfall. Somebody passed away and left them a lot of money, and they left a lot of it to the church, and it covered your budget for the next 10 years. Would you still teach giving? Because the church needs it.
Yeah.
The church does need it to some
Right.
extent, but that's Jesus' bride. He loves his bride. He's going to take care of it. But they need to give. It's good for their heart. It's good for their own soul to be a giver. And so you would still cultivate that just out of a sense of obedience.
I think that's interesting, that reality of just communicating that and connecting those dots is going to be a key component for those churches moving forward in a positive direction.
You can't assume, because they're being discipled about money and finance, many other ways that are contradictory to what the Bible teaches.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Just wanted to make sure everything was still all right. As you think in terms of Florida Baptist Financial Services, y'all do a whole host of different things.
We do.
Education, you kind of help come along. That's part of the reason why you guys exist, is to help churches in those areas.
That's right.
So what are some of the stories of impact that would resonate well with pastors and churches?
Oh, yeah. One of the benefits of being in this role, just like when you're a pastor and you see amazing acts of obedience and service to Jesus, we see that here. Usually there's a financial story involved with that. As a foundation, we were started in 1947 to help facilitate charitable giving to churches and Baptist institutions. That's why we've been around for 80 plus years. We still do that primarily through helping people with estate plans and charitable gifts, setting those up, managing those funds, and seeing those funds distributed towards kingdom causes, back to the church, to One More Child, International Mission Board, cooperative program, all the things that we believe should happen as not only believers, but as Southern Baptist and Florida Baptist. So we have a lot of stories of incredible generosity of people. So there's one lady coming to mind. It's a story we talk about. It's happening right now, but she lived into her 90s. Just for privacy, I won't name her name, but an incredibly generous lady. Back when there was Eastern Airlines, she was a flight attendant. They would have been called stewardesses back then. And she was like the concierge, preeminent ionosphere. Like if Delta has their platinum club, this is what Eastern Airlines had. She was the concierge. If you were the ambassador of Norway coming to Miami in the 1970s, she would make sure you had your hotel taken care of and all of your travel plans made. And she would concierge VIPs for Eastern Airlines. Never got married, never had kids, some extended family, but no immediate family. Was a member of one of our churches in South Florida, generous during her lifetime towards her church, but also ministries like Florida Children's Home, One More Child, other things. We had the privilege of walking with her for a long period of time, one of our staff members, and helping her create a path of generosity in her estate. She lived in a little 2-bedroom condo in South Florida that was modest. She traveled the world. She saw children all over the world, and she had a heart for children to know Jesus. And so she accumulated income and wealth over a period of time. There's millions of dollars now that we're stewarding for kingdom causes. She passed away about 13, 14 months ago. And we are serving as successor trustee of her trust that we helped her set up and fund with all of these assets. And cooperative program, International Mission Board, everything that's funded through CP, but also One More Child and other things are going to receive annual distributions from this trust. It's incredible because, well, how much did she leave? All of it. All of it. Now, there was a little bit that she sent to some of her extended family, but, how much are you and I going to leave? All of it.
Yeah.
So why not have a really intentional plan for how you want to honor the Lord through your finances? She didn't have children, so that was not a consideration. But even so, her act of generosity was amazing. We get to see stories like that. The other side of our work is primarily around lending to churches that have a capital need to buy property, to build buildings and that sort of thing. 30 years ago, Florida Baptists realized real estate in Florida is very expensive, and the capital markets through the banks are not always available to the church needing to buy 5-10 acres, build a building, so forth. And so they started our own fund to be able to do that, Church Growth Investment Fund. That fund today has distributed over $280 million in loans to Florida Baptist churches. All of those loans have paid back into the fund with interest, and then we're able to lend more back out. Individuals and churches can invest in that fund. So that's a whole separate line of ministry for us, but it is very active and we're known for that. We see story after story of God moving, not only to see this new project get completed, but God moved through his people to express incredible generosity to pay off the loan. We always tell people we're the only lender excited when you pay off your loan. Yeah. Because we don't make any more income on it after that. But we have actually 2 stories in the last 5 years right near the ribbon cutting when it was time for them to go into the new building, one in Miami, one in Tampa area. God moved in the life of one of the members of those churches to write a complete payoff. Both of them were in the $4 million range and pay off that debt.
That's great. That's fantastic.
That's incredible. We get to have a front row seat of seeing that kind of generosity happen over and over. Yes, Florida Baptists are generous, but what a wonderful God we serve that moves in the hearts of his people to make sure that his church is taken care of. Those are the kind of stories we get to see on a regular basis.
And I think there's something to the fact that whenever somebody donates, it's not out of the blue. God absolutely moved on their hearts. But there's also been some faithful stewardship that they've observed along the way.
That's right. That's right.
To where intentionality, they see, okay, they're being intentional with taking out this loan.
Right.
They've been smart about it.
Yep.
You guys do capital campaigns
We
now.
do. Mm-hmm.
They're intentional about how they're investing those funds for Baptist Initiative, for all sorts of benefit.
They see it and the Lord sees it.
Yeah.
I think the Lord's going to resource those who are being good stewards, being intentional with resources. That's a very biblical principle. How you cultivate and practice your ministry in a very focused and surrendered way, but very giving way. Some of the most well-funded churches I know are also some of the most giving and generous churches I know. I don't think it's because they're funded they give. I think because they give, they're funded.
So let me ask this. You've sat in my role before, and in the type of role that I serve in. And, you know, we call ourselves a family of churches. But from an associational standpoint, what would you say associations need to start planning for from a financial standpoint? We need to start preparing for, because we know that financially things are getting difficult. We know that real estate costs are going up, building costs are going up, that kingdom work is, we serve a big God. How can we better plan and prepare?
It's a great question, and it's very complex because there's some nuance to it. I'll zoom out and then I'll come back. First, have the conversation about who we are and where we're going as an association. The journey that you guys are on here in Northeast Florida is going to be remarkably different than, say, Miami or Pensacola or other places. So nobody gets a pass on good fundamental leadership of listening to the mission field. Our friend Bob Baumgartner has a great quote, "Field will lead you to the future." Be very good at listening to the mission field and become who the mission field needs. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, then the funding will happen in concert with the kind of network and organization that you need. Do you need a building? Maybe, maybe not. We're finding a lot less building-centric networks now. We have worked with at least 4 or 5 around the state, including you guys, who said, we don't need bricks and mortar, but we can take the financial assets that's invested in that and deploy it in other more kingdom-serving ways. And that's a smart move. Does everybody need to do that? Probably not. But for you guys, that made sense, and we're having that same conversation across the state. I would say focus on, again, coming back to Dr. Sullivan, leadership in my life. He had another very direct comment that said, ultimately, and he was speaking of the Florida Baptist Convention, but I think this is true at all levels of convention life, the convention will be what pastors and churches choose for it to be. Listen to the mission field, but also listen to your church leaders. What is the Holy Spirit saying through them? The benefit you have as an associational leader is you're talking with somebody in breakfast and another person midday and having a conversation in the evening. You're having 20, 30 conversations a week with pastors and kingdom leaders in your network. You have a perspective that is unique. The pastors don't have time to have all of those conversations, nor does somebody like us at a state level or beyond, a national level, a North American Mission Board. They don't have the capacity to be that local. That's where I think the proximity is so key. You're uniquely positioned to not only know what's happening in your mission field, but to know what's happening in the term I would use is the mission force. So when I was, I'm drinking out of my old Engaged Jacks throwback mug from about 10 years ago, which was kind of our moniker here in Jacksonville. But the mantra of Engaged Jacks, so before there was a First Coast Churches, we called it Engaged Jacks, was connecting the mission force with the mission field. When you sit down with a pastor, that pastor should have no better person informed about their mission field than you. They're going to know things that you don't know about, and that's how you learn more, but you're going to know things. But then also, you know what's happening among the other churches. And many times, whatever a church is facing, another church within their reach is also facing. Right. And if nothing else, they can commiserate together, but they can usually resource each other at a higher level than the local association programmatically could.
Absolutely.
Or a state convention or anybody else. Helping the churches resource one another. And typically, you don't need a big budget to do that. The big change when I came into the Jacksonville Association was we still had a lot of residential programming where we had directors of things, and we had staff, and we had program, and we had, a director of this and a director of that. What we ended up doing is flipping that on its head and really becoming the early end of that curve where the association was being redefined in a very healthy way to be what the churches wanted to be. It'll get funded according to what it needs to be.
Yeah.
In the same way that people in a church will give when they see focus, clarity, movement, and impact. You don't assume that the churches are going to experience that. You have to be really good at telling your story as an association.
Understanding your specific needs in that region.
That's right, which are going to be different.
Vastly different. If an association said that they wanted to start providing some sort of micro assistance, like micro loan or something along those lines, not like what you guys do and not what the Florida Baptist Convention does, but even smaller loan, what would that look like for them?
There are some associations that do that today. We started that when I was at Jacksonville. On the low end, 5 to 10,000, up to maybe 20 or 30,000. Once you get up to 50, 75, the convention has a great loan program for that. But let's say the air conditioner goes out. We know we can pay this off in a year, but we need 20 grand to put a new air conditioner in, or 25 or whatever it costs to fix an air conditioner these days. A micro loan or even a small grant kind of a program. I know there are several associations around the state. We learned from Richard Williamson down in Lakeland. They had a loan program. And when we wanted to set one up here, I called him. We didn't do exactly what they were doing, but we patterned a lot after that and learned from it. So there is some wisdom in how to do all of that. From a financial standpoint, you just put the fund in there and you can spend out of that fund. It can be as simple as a money market account that you manage, or you can invest the funds depending on how much you anticipate needing on a yearly basis. But there's some financial considerations, but strategically, if an association can do it, I think it's a good value. And we didn't do a ton of those, but we had regular onesie twosies a year of churches that would fit that need.
Makes sense.
A lot of younger churches that just don't have the reserves built up that we could help.
So you've been here for 6 years. What are you excited about for the next 6 years as you look at what's taking place, but also opportunities that are on the horizon?
So let me use my own paradigm and talk about the mission field and then who we are and how we're trying to meet those needs. What we're seeing is several trends that are relevant to us. One is people are more interested in kingdom sourcing and kingdom causes, and that fact that their investment should have a faith element to it. We just don't want to put our money with a secular investment company that might be investing in things counter to what the Bible teaches. Having a faith-driven investing strategy really matters more and more. And that's a newer, that the idea of staying out of bad things has been around for a while, but the idea of marshaling capital to do good, to get a return, and then make a distribution to do more good is a newer concept that we're chasing hard after here. And so that's a whole nother podcast we could have around faith-driven investing. And there is a podcast called Faith-Driven Investing that I would recommend to anybody that wants to hear more about that. The other thing I would say, I mentioned earlier that great transference of wealth. So we're in a field where we're harvesting as fast as we can kingdom dollars, like that story I told you from the lady in South Florida. There are many, many people in our churches who want to bless their church, they want to bless the kingdom, and we need to come. A typical estate planning attorney, not against any of them, but they're not going to surface those conversations. No. That's where we can come in and say, be wise, be tax smart, but also you can do some things that are kingdom smart and see a big impact through your life. The greatest opportunity for generosity that any of us will ever have is when we graduate and go to heaven.
Yeah.
So helping have more of those conversations, the transference of wealth, and the opportunity to make an impact and make it more on earth as it is in heaven through our investments. Probably the two biggest things that we're leaning into. Under the hood of who we are and our structure and our posture right now, we're growing significantly. So we have, just however you want to measure it, assets under management or just our capacity, our budget, we've kind of doubled in the last 5 years. Just like in a church or any organization, that's wonderful, but it also brings a number of stress points that we're experiencing. So I'm spending a lot of my time hiring, putting staff in the field. So we just brought on a staff member, a part-time basis out in Pensacola. That's going to be, think regional catalyst for us.
Right.
We call it a church and client representative, but it's going to represent us to churches. So if you're in Tallahassee West and you need somebody from our organization to come down and sit down, come out and sit with you and talk about any of the things that we've talked about, you don't have to wait a month or 6 weeks to get on my calendar. You can get on their calendar in the next week or two. So we just hired a person in Lakeland who's going to help primarily in the lending function and helping churches with loans, primarily in Central Florida and South Florida, again, for proximity basis, having people not living in Jacksonville. We have a gentleman on our staff now who lives in Miami who speaks Spanish. First time we've ever had staff outside of Jacksonville was 5 years ago when I came here. That was part of our vision, and I help churches find what we do a lot more easy than we have in the past. So having those distributed staff out in the field, the software, the accounting, things that need to happen, all of the other infrastructure that has to happen. We're recording this here in our offices, Bay Meadows in Jacksonville. I'll give you a little tour of our offices, and you'll see we've taken one of our larger rooms in the back and just subdivided it down for office space because we're running out of office space. Yeah. So just finding places for people to sit and do ministry. They're exciting things to deal with, but they are challenges nonetheless.
Always. Expanding is always a blessing. It's a challenge.
It is a challenge. But I wouldn't want to trade this set of problems for another set of problems.
Any last minute things that you think pastor or church needs to hear?
Yeah. Man, just to be encouraged. Jesus loves his church. He died for his church. We know that. We preach that. But in our bones, do we believe it? The enemy, particularly in the area of finances, but in other areas too, bring a lot of attack, can bring a lot of doubt, can bring a lot of condemnation if you aren't doing things the best way or you feel like you could do better. I would say move out of that mode. Just be a faithful steward. Do the best you can with what you have for the season of time that you have an opportunity to lead, and know that we're here to help. And so I can tell you with no shadow of a doubt, the Lord is loving and resourcing his church and his kingdom all across this state and beyond. We'd love to come alongside and walk with you. Be encouraged. Yeah. There's a lot of practical things we want to talk to churches about, but in the heart of things, don't shy away from the conversation about finances with your leaders, certainly not from the pulpit.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed it.